I went to the Vienna Conservatorium, as it was called, with a lot of other little boys and girls when I was about 6 or 7, but not to do piano, because I had private piano lessons. Anybody who was above the poverty line in Vienna learned the piano. I'll put it like that.
Yes.
You know, the dustman in Vienna wanted to fork out for piano lessons because the piano was a piece of furniture in Vienna. It stood there. You didn't go and have to get... You inherited it from your grandma or whatever it was. And
But I think there was some truth in that here, too.
Absolutely.
Yes?
Don't you think? Yes.
I come from
yes.
sort of a not particularly musical piano, but a musical family, but there was a piano there which was dusted regularly.
It was dusted, and if you were lucky enough to have a grand piano, then you could put things on top, like
Yes.
like over here. And even an upright piano had the alabaster busts of Weber and Spohr. Good for you.
And maybe Beethoven.
There's a learned young man. Spohr, the Last Judgment of.
Yeah.
Yes. And Beethoven and Bach, of course, with his wig and so on. And they were inspiring little busts and so on. But you could put things on. And so I played reasonably well. And when we left Vienna, because the Nazis marched into Vienna, quite a horrendous period, really, and somehow we found ourselves en route via Belgium, of all places. First Italy. It's quite a sort of a semi-dramatic way that we left. My parents were luckily not in Vienna at the time when the Germans marched in. They were on a business trip in Holland. And we were told, get the first train out of Vienna, preferably south, because we had family in Hungary. And that would have been going east.
Yes.
And so luckily we went south, went to a place called Merano in Italy, over the Alps, and then soon to Switzerland, then to Belgium, particularly Antwerp. And in Belgium, the family reassembled, because we'd all been in different places. And that was at the end of April.
38.
38. So it took a month before the family was there. And on the 1st of May 1938, I arrived in London. My first trip across the ocean. Terribly sick. I'd never seen the sea before.
And did you speak any English?
Well, the 3 weeks that I spent between March and the end of April were in Antwerp, and my father insisted that the entire family had daily lessons in English, not in French, which would have been normal in Antwerp. But England, he says, England and America is the future. So I could say, yes, hello, grapefruit, kipper, those sort of things. And can you tell me the way to Leicester Square? Nobody told me Leicester Square was the last place I ought to have been as a little boy. But no, we could get about, and I was put into a little boarding school.
Where did you live? Near here?
The boarding school was in Maresfield Gardens, 2 doors away from Sigmund Freud.
Wow.
Hampstead.
Yeah.
And then I went to a little boarding school which was set up by some refugee teachers from Germany who wanted to prepare refugees from Europe for English school life. It was a wonderful idea.
Yes.
And that was a lady from Leipzig. And she insisted on nobody must speak a word of German. It must be in English. And of course, we sort of stammered away with German accents and Austrian accents, Polish accents. And she hired 2 teachers to do that. One was a master from Harrow, and the other was a master from Eton. And she says, nothing but the best. And we learned English, such as we did, from these 2 Eton and Harrow schoolmasters. And they taught us cricket.
Did you play?
Rugby?
I was put, force majeure, I was put onto mid-off. Mid-off, and because I was new, I didn't know how dangerous it is. On the first day in the schoolyard, somebody bashed a real good thing straight forward. The ball hit me on the head.
And that was you finished with cricket.
I didn't. From then on, they put me on to long stop, which is at the back of the field.
Furthest out.
Yes.
Fascinating. And how did you find England as a place to come to? Did you feel sort of welcomed? Was it?
You, John, are lucky enough, so are you, Pam, to be of a generation who look at England the way it is. I look at England quite sanely and so on, and I see all the things that are wrong. To me, England was something that was just a fantasy of peace, of safety, of wonderful life. Polite people, people gave seats to the elderly in the bus. People opened the door to a lady, young or old. An old man would give up his seat to a young girl because she was a lady. It was that sort of period. And of course, during the war, all hands together, everybody. It was a period which nobody who lived through that war would forget. No. Maybe there were lots of things wrong, but we lived a great deal of the war. Eventually, we found our way to Oxford, and we rented a little house there. And I went to school in Oxford. And to give you an idea, while the war was going on and so on, and we read in the papers or we heard on the radio about the Battle of Britain and all the things, my mother, when she opened the door to the milkman in the morning, was heard by us having breakfast to say to the milkman, "Oh yes, the battle is going well. I have the greatest admiration for your pillows." And the milkman we then all trooped through the hall, and so the milkman was sort of looking absolutely vacant. What, of course, she meant for your pilots.
Pilot.
Pilot, because she could speak French. Anyway, it was that sort of period. My entry to New College, Oxford, was in 1943. I was quite young. I was 17. And I still did not think music was going to be my profession. I was actually more interested in painting. I went to a painter's studio twice a week, and I did drawings and things like that. But my father insisted that I must get a degree. And I said, "From which university?" And he said, "The nearest one." And since we were living in Oxford, he says, "So you go to Oxford?" So he was an academic, basically. So I said, "Well, you can't just walk into a university." So he found out that one of the fellows of New College was, in fact, the head of a thing called the Ruskin School of Drawing.
Indeed.
At the Ashmolean Museum. And undergraduates were encouraged to learn how to draw for the good of their soul, kind of artistic temperament. And this man, Albert Rotherstone, who had changed his name from Rothenstein, who was the brother of Sir William Rothenstein, the artist. He was also a fine artist. And because of that connection, I think my father knew him through the art publishing world, and he said, "So you want to draw?" He said, "Well," I said, "My father wants me to do a degree." He says, "Why don't you do a degree at New College? And that gives you a chance to do drawing with us."
Yes.
So I really went in on drawing. And I said, "Well, what shall I study?" And he said, "Well, it doesn't matter." I said, "I can speak German." He said, "Well, I'll do German." I said, "Do you speak French?" I said, "Well, a little bit." He said, "Well, French and German." And I said, but actually, I was told that I ought to study music as well. He said, do music as well. And so I took a pass degree to get a BA, because music was not a degree, it was a second degree. Music was a postgraduate degree. You couldn't just study music. You had to have a BA to study music. So I took a BA in French and German, and alongside the music degree. And it was while I was sitting drawing in the Ashmolean these statues of Roman and Greek gods and so on, I suddenly said to myself halfway through that this is good. I earned a bit of money, by the way, doing portraits for people. I paid for my studies with Boulanger with 5 portraits, which I did. This
Goodness.
was already, yeah.
That's impressive.
You must have been quite good.
Well, I got the likeness. And I was an academic painter and draftsman, but it didn't speak to me. I suddenly realized this is artifact, not art.
I think we should talk about the beginnings of your career as a lecturer.
Yes, well, that takes me back to during the war. Takes me back when I was with my family evacuated to Oxford. And I had entered New College, which I mentioned before. And I suppose it must have been 1944, about a year or so after my studies started at New College, that I received papers as, I have to go back for a moment. I was classed officially as an enemy alien because I was a citizen of Austria. Austria was at war. Austria was part of Germany. Germany was at war with Britain. And so I was an enemy alien, and we were restricted in our movements. I could not move outside Oxford without police permission. My father was still carrying on working in his publishing business, and he had to go to London every now and again, and I think he obtained a kind of general dispensation to go to London. The rest of my family, my mother was restricted. My two younger sisters could move about, but of course they couldn't because they were too young anyway. And enemy aliens were, if they were Class C, it was known as Class C brackets friendly. So I was an enemy alien, Class C brackets friendly. That was literally in my papers. I
wonder who qualified for a Class A unfriendly.
I tell you who did. Lord Haw. In other words,
but he wasn't alien.
No, he wasn't alien, but he was Class A.
Class A.
He was Class A. In other words, they were regarded as spies.
Yeah.
And there were a number of Englishmen and a few Scotsmen, and I think some members of the aristocracy were more or less persona non grata.
Well, like Mosley.
Mosley, yes, and so on. But anyway, there was this group of Austrian and German refugees who were enemy aliens, Class C brackets friendly, who were due to be called up for war work. We were entitled to do war work, but of course not as members of the fighting forces. And the option was to do war work, curiously, either to work in a munitions factory, which was crazy if one of us wanted to be a spy.
Indeed.
Yeah, and the other was to
Sabotage.
work down the mines, the coal mines. And I got my papers because for some reason, nobody had called me up at the age of 16, but I was then about 17 and a half, going on to 18. The papers were a report to the local army office in headquarters in Oxford, and they said, right, well, I said, munitions, no, but I said, I'm a student at the Oxford University. They waved it aside and said, you will report in 2 weeks' time to headquarters somewhere or other. And most likely you will be doing mining work. So I reported this to Sir Hugh Allen, who was the holder of the chair. He was the professor of music, Oxford University. He was actually a fellow of New College, so it was in my college.
Was he not director of college?
He was the director of the college before.
Ah, and then he went to Oxford.
Then he went there, but he was at the same time, he doubled up as director of the Royal College of Music and professor in Oxford. Can you imagine that? I mean, tremendous personality, wonderful person. And I went to see him the top floor in one of the buildings in New College, and he said, "That's terrible if you're leaving. That's terrible." Very gruff sailor, with a white moustache. And he said, "Let's see what we can do about this," And he lifted the phone and he dialed. So, "Oh, Alan speaking." I heard all this. "Got a young fellow here in New College." New College. "Really? Quite a good idea. I'll tell him. See you later." And he said, "I'm going to write out something. You're going to see a Dr. Hansen." He said, "He's a New Zealander, but he's okay."
Yeah.
And he's in Rooley House, Wellington Square, Oxford, which is the headquarters of the Army Education Office, South Midland District. I got it firmly in my memory. I said, "Yes, Sir Hugh. What does it mean? Why?" He said, "Well, I think they need somebody to lecture on music appreciation to the forces." And I thought, well, what a world we're living in. Here am I, barely able to harmonize a hymn tune, and it's just starting. He said, "That might actually enable you to continue your studies at New College, but Dr. Hansen will inform you what to do." So I went along by bike. Everybody went by bike. Saw this rather amiable man. I found out afterwards that Dr. Hansen was the husband of the founder of the Wazolia Record Company, Loreley Dyer.
Yes.
She was Dyer Hansen.
Loreley Dyer.
Loreley Dyer.
Who went on to marry Stanford Robinson.
Later.
Yes.
Later.
Yes.
Yes.
She was Mrs. Stanford. She was a sort of light soprano.
I
wasn't
knew
she?
it was nice that you were in on this conversation,
Absolutely.
John. Get that? I never knew that.
Yes, that's right.
Loreley Dyer, she was the Wazolia, Lear,
Yes.
Lyre,
Yes.
Loreley Dyer,
Lyrebird.
Lyrebird Press. And I didn't know this at the time. There was this rather formidable, rather friendly-looking man sitting there, and he said, "Look, you're going to have a series of lectures. You better prepare. We've got a number of lecturers on various subjects, literature, history, and we just now need somebody to do some music appreciation, which was a very important part of the army education. First of all, it was nice. People liked music. And at the time, there was a wonderful pair called Dobson and Young.
Oh, yes.
Dobson and Young, you might just remember.
I do remember. I remember my father loving them.
They were absolute stars.
Yes.
If you could, Dobson and Young was like a comedy team, but doing music appreciation. If one could only hear recordings of them.
It's to think that such a thing could exist. You can't imagine such a thing now,
No,
can
you
you?
can't.
But they
No.
were they
Giving
knew
music appreciation to the troops in Iraq. Can you imagine anything more unlikely?
Well, I don't. It wasn't.
It's the same. You know,
Well,
it
it
is
was.
the same.
But yeah, I suppose they even went to Germany. Dobson and Young were famous in the country. It was. If you say Dobson and Young was like Marks and Spencer.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
remember, everybody was in the forces then.
Yeah.
So you had a completely different population.
Dobson and Young had this idea that you would introduce music on a higher plane by starting out with Polly Wolly Doodle. Yes. And one of them was the pianist, and the other one put on records. And one of them was the sort of comedian. It was fabulous. And they said, this man Hansen said, "Look, listen to one or two of the broadcasts and you'll see what's needed. You don't have to go down as far as this because we haven't got the facilities." I said, "Well, how do I do all that?" He said, "Well, I hear you're a rather good pianist, so you're going to play them something. whatever you like to play, which you think they would like. So I said Chopin. I said, yes, Chopin, a bit of Mozart, a bit of song. And I said, but how long do I play a sonata? No sonatas. No.
Short.
I wish some more people would program.
Short, and you have to, and don't forget these young men and women, and you'll also go to the women's quarters there. This is an hour and a half when they are off duty, and they love it. They will lap it up, because they're not under the command of the commanding officer, and you must do what you like. And you're going to be given a gramophone with a handle, obviously.
Of course, what
else?
A
gramophone, and you must not use steel needles. You must only use fiber needles. So I said, but it takes a while while you sharpen the fiber needles to put into the gramophone arm to play. He said, well, we'll supply you with many sharpened fiber needles, so you don't waste time. Of course, you've got to put them in. Well, you have to talk while you put them in, so you don't waste time. And the next step was that 2 evenings, 2 afternoons per week, and that went on for about 6-7 months.
And where did you teach them?
That's the interesting thing. I never knew. I could not know.
You weren't allowed to know.
I was picked up by Jeep in New College Lane, which had blackened windows, because I was an enemy alien.
Brackets
friendly. You're right.
Class C brackets.
Thinking about it after these many years, it is totally unbelievable.
Absurd.
I kid you not. This was, and I was.
How long were you? Were you an hour away? Were you in Northampton? Were you in Glasgow? Were you in Oxford?
No, couldn't be. Because I always actually landed up back in my bed at New College.
Right.
I was in the premises, but I was picked up at about 3 in the afternoon. Got back at about 1 in the morning. Now, where was I? Presumably the home counties. How long did my father said, where were you, like you? He said, I don't know. I said, all I can tell you, it was an RAF camp, because I recognized the uniform, or a naval thing.
So you might have been lecturing to my father and mother.
Could be. And I was not allowed. This was the thing. He says, I'm very sorry, sir. Said the very pretty driver. They always had a young woman driver. It was very sexist in those days. Never once was there a man driver. Why was it? Because somehow that was it. The officers were driven by young women. So I was in there, and I was unloaded with this gramophone. With a pack of records which weighed a ton, because of course they were 78 records, and I selected a bit of the Fledermaus. I got some bit of Mozart, eine kleine Nachtmusik, and it went on like this. And I was brought back, and there was always a nice bun fight, drinks and officers. I remember once it was an army. Depot, an army camp, because of the uniform, and I was introduced by the commanding officer, and he said, are you going to have a lecture on the appreciation of music, which you're all looking forward to, like that, and they tell me that Mr. Horovitz is the son of the famous violinist. And I began my talk by saying, well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to inform you that I'm actually not the son. And by the way, he is not a violinist, he's a pianist. So everybody said, oh, no, the commanding officer. Anyway, those are the stories. And I suppose it was, I learned how to steer a lecture. When it wasn't it was a musical illustrated lecture and a little seminar, and it had to be kept within certain bounds.
And how were they received by?
Well, people clapped and so on. I don't know whether they enjoyed it or not, but because they enjoyed not having to muck out God knows what. And I mean, it went down all right, and I improved. And I also developed a method of assembling facts. Because during the day, I was frightened stiff. I sat in the Bodleian library and in the music faculty library, getting dates and things, because I have to say, Grieg was a Norwegian, and he played. I said, "Ich liebe dich." I sang the song. I had a record, and then I started to play "Morning" by Grieg, and a little bit. It had to be geared that way, and I suppose that was the first time I had an audience.
And it got you out of going down the mines as well.
It got me out. It enabled me to actually stay in Oxford University during that period. That was the story.
You weren't a Bevan boy.
I wasn't a Bevan boy.
Extraordinary.
Right? So eventually I did a music degree, and then my mother, who was the guiding spirit to all this, she was the more practical one, said, "You can't just have a degree. What does a degree mean? What are you going to do?" So you have to go on studying. You can't just loaf around with a degree in music. And I, in the meantime, wasn't going to do any more painting. So it was decided to send me to the Royal College of Music. She said, "You must study." And then I went to my tutor in Oxford, R.O. Morris, who said, "Yes, well, that's a very good idea. Go to the Royal College of Music. I'll give you an introduction to my housemate, as it were." He didn't use the word mate. Was it Hugo Anson? And that's, now that you know the story, how I got in there. And at the point, I realized I was going to be some sort of musician, but not a composer. Composer, I was not driven to compose. I was driven to conduct and to arrange and to make music.